What if the Norman conquest failed? Picture the arrow that ends a dynasty missing its mark. Picture a muddy hillside at Hastings, where shield walls hold, horses break, and a duke stumbles in the chaos. Imagine the year 1066 cracking, and instead of a Norman sunrise, England wakes to the cold light of a Saxon dawn. No foreign lords carving the island into fiefs. No Norman castles punching stone teeth into the countryside. The English language never swallowing a tidal wave of French. The map we know, your classroom atlas, every empire's lineage, shifts. Let's ground ourselves in what truly happened. In the autumn of 1066, England was already exhausted. Harold Godwinson had sprinted north to crush a Viking invasion at Stamford Bridge. Days later, he was sprinting south toward Hastings to meet a new storm. William, Duke of Normandy, claiming the crown. Harold's men formed a shield wall on a ridge. They held through waves of Norman infantry and cavalry. Then, the turn. Whether by retreat feints, fatigue, or a fatal arrow, Harold fell. With him, Anglo Saxon England fell. William triumphed. He crowned himself in Westminster. Normans took the land, the church, the courts. They imported feudalism and French. They built stone fortresses and wrote the Domesday Book, counting every cow and plow. England was refitted into a continental machine, forever entangled in French politics. From this came the Angevin Empire, the 100 Years' War, the rise of English as a hybrid tongue, and, centuries later, the maritime empire that painted maps red. Now, change one moment. On Senlac Hill, Harold's shield wall holds. The Saxon Huscarls, those axe-wielding elites, carve into the Norman cavalry. Arrows dip short in the wind. William's horse rears and throws him. Rumor spreads. The Duke is down. He isn't killed, but the field is lost. The Normans break for their ships, harried by furdmen with spears and rage. The Channel turns against them, storms shredding sails. William limps back to Normandy, alive, beaten, and politically wounded. England inhales, a battered chest but breathing. What does a Saxon victory really mean? Start with the crown. Harold Godwinson survives, but he's no absolute king. Anglo Saxon England is a negotiated kingdom. The Witan, the Council of Nobles and Clergy, has teeth. Earls hold power in their shires. Law is local. Castles are rare. The Church is English in culture, even if Rome sets doctrine. Without Norman lords carving the land and installing their bishops, that structure endures. Centralization slows. England remains a realm of shires and moots, not of towering keeps and iron-fisted castellans. Language bends in a new direction. Old English lives, not frozen. Languages never are, but evolving under Scandinavian and Latin influence, not drowned in French. The court speaks a Germanic tongue. Law words aren't jury and court, but still Gmot and doom. You don't have beef and pork versus cow and pig. You have a single honest word for meat. Poetry holds kennings longer. Everyday speech keeps a harder edge. Over centuries it still simplifies, but it doesn't absorb 10,000 elegant French loanwords. The English we know today, half Germanic, half Latin, never takes that shape. The global lingua franca, the language of airports and algorithms, might never be English at all. Diplomacy shifts. Without Norman claims across the Channel, England is not sucked into the whirlpool of French dynastic wars. No Angevin kings clutching Normandy and Aquitaine. No slow-burn rivalry erupting into the 100 Years' War. The Capetians in Paris expand into Normandy more easily. France consolidates earlier, cleaner, without a foreign king on their northern doorstep. That single change shifts the center of gravity in Western Europe. With fewer cross-channel entanglements, England turns to the North Sea. Look north and east. Merchant guilds, wool exports, harbors smelling of tar and oak pitch. A Saxon England, free of French heartbreak, leans into trade with the Low Countries and the Baltic. The Hanseatic League offers a model, a network of towns bound by commerce rather than conquest. London grows, but it grows as a merchant citadel, not a feudal court. The Witan, seasoned by centuries of consultation, hardens into a sturdier assembly. A kind of parliamentary tradition may still emerge, rooted not in Norman conflict but in mercantile bargaining. Money speaks in the Shire Hall. At home, the island's map looks different. The Norman kings hammered Wales and Scotland with castles and marcher lordships. Without them, the push into Wales is slower, patchy, more negotiated. Scotland is not dragged into an English orbit quite so ruthlessly. The British Isles may remain a mosaic longer. A powerful England, yes, but alongside robust Welsh and Scottish polities. Later unions, if they happen, are more federal, less conquered. The cultural texture of Britain is denser, less smoothed by conquest. The church's road forks too. Normans replaced English bishops and brought tighter papal alignment. In this Saxon timeline, the English church keeps a proud streak of independence. Rome is respected, but local saints, local customs, and synods matter. When crusading calls ring out in 1095, England's response is cooler. Some nobles go, sure, glory is glory, but the kingdom does not fling itself into the Levant with the same Norman zeal. Fewer English fortunes bleed into Outremer. The Templar and Hospitaller footprint is smaller. The Crusader states are a little weaker, a little more Frankish, a little less Anglo-Norman. The ripple in the eastern Mediterranean is subtle but real. Without a Plantagenet empire, France changes. No English-held Aquitaine means fewer English archers raining death on French knights. The longbow's legend may fade. No Crécy, no Agincourt, no figure like Joan of Arc riding a wave of national desperation. France consolidates with less trauma and perhaps centralizes earlier. A stronger, calmer France in the 13th and 14th centuries will take that strength somewhere, into Italy, into Flanders, into the Atlantic. And then we reach the hinge centuries, the age of sail. Here, the Saxon victory's shadow stretches across oceans. If England is not chopped into rebellion and reconciliation over religion, if no Norman-descended dynasties breed the exact sequence that leads to a break with Rome under a king like Henry VIII, then the English Reformation is not inevitable. It might still come, but it arrives later, under different pretexts, perhaps with less fury. No Reformation? The Spanish Armada never sails. No Armada? England never gets the national myth of a Protestant island chosen by the winds. Without that myth, English privateers don't hunt Iberian treasure ships with the same righteous fire. The first crucial pivot to a blue water empire stalls. So who fills the vacuum? Spain and Portugal, unharried by an English pirate swarm, double down on the Americas. France, no longer bled by English wars, throws more settlers into Canada and the Mississippi. The Dutch, masters of credit and shipbuilding, plant trading posts from Hudson Bay to the Cape. The Atlantic seaboard of North America looks different. A patchwork of French-speaking cities, Dutch commercial hubs, Spanish missions pushing further east, a massive English-speaking New World, not guaranteed. There are still migratory pressures and religious dissenters in Europe, but without an English state aligned to protect and supply them, their destinations scatter. Meanwhile, a North Sea England is not idle. It eyes Iceland and Greenland, even hears whispers about western lands from hardy fishermen. But settlement is costly, and a cautious merchant-dominated government weighs risk hard. Colonies trickle, not flood. Newfoundland becomes a cod station with a Saxon name, not a Plymouth. And yet, do not underestimate the island. Coal still sits under English hills. Iron still sleeps in the ground. Rivers still turn wheels. With a culture of shire rights and merchant leverage, property law evolves in a pragmatic direction. A robust common law, an early familiarity with chartered towns and trade privileges, this is fertile soil for finance. When the Dutch invent sophisticated credit, England's North Sea orientation makes imitation natural. An English-Dutch marriage of convenience, not royal but mercantile, feeds innovation. The industrial spark may ignite in a slightly different century, but it still ignites on that damp island. The Industrial Revolution under a Saxon-spirited state is less aristocratic swagger and more guild-to-factory evolution. No Hanoverian court scene, perhaps a different dynasty entirely, but a similar outcome. Steam, iron, textiles, rail. The difference is geopolitical. Without centuries of naval doctrine honed against Spain and France, England's navy takes longer to become a blunt instrument of empire. Trade fleets first, gunboats later. The world still industrializes, but the empire that rides steam does not look exactly British. It is more plural. Dutch mergers, French colonies enlarged, Spanish systems retooled, and an English sphere that hugs the North Atlantic and North Sea. Here's the strangest result. The language of rail tickets, telegraphs, and treaties in the 19th century might be French or a Franco-Dutch blend. French prestige, freed from the trauma of a centuries-long Anglo War, remains high. A different Enlightenment vogue, the salon reaches further. Scientific terms crystallize in Paris and Leiden, not London. English remains important in its sphere, but globally, it is a sturdy regional voice, not the world's microphone. The Shakespeare of this world writes with fewer Latinate flourishes. The Newton of this world publishes in a language that sounds harsher to our ears. The global lingua franca becomes something else entirely. Air traffic controllers in the 20th century call out altitudes in French. Midway through this alternate timeline, stop and ask yourself, if the Norman conquest failed, does England still build an empire? Or does a stronger France and a richer Dutch Republic dominate the seas? And which map feels more plausible to you? If this kind of deep dive rewrites how you see the past, consider subscribing and sharing your take below. Return to the British Isles. The absence of Norman marcher lords changes Ireland too. Conquest arrives later, if at all, and likely in a piecemeal mercantile style. Ports negotiated, not provinces seized. The British state, when it finally coalesces, looks less like a hammer and more like a braided rope. A federal union of shires and kingdoms could emerge in the 1700s as trade knits them together. The effect on politics is subtle but profound. More local autonomy, a less centralized empire ethos, fewer explosive revolts on colonial frontiers because there are fewer overbearing acts to spark them. No 100 Years' War also means fewer experiments with mass taxation and wartime bureaucracy in medieval England. Some institutional developments arrive later. The Bank of England might be born under stronger Dutch influence or be replaced entirely by a joint North Sea credit exchange headquartered in London and Amsterdam. Finance still flourishes, but its culture is more cooperative, less imperial. When railways spread, capital follows trade routes built over centuries. The Baltic, the Low Countries, the Rhineland, India and China matter immensely. But the British push is slower, leaving France and a reforming Spain more space in Asia and the Pacific. The French in Indochina are not a latecomer story. They are the early dominant tale. In culture, a Saxon England gives Europe a different canon. Courtly love and chivalric romance never dominate the way Norman French tastes push them. Epic cycles in the English tradition cling closer to Beowulf than to Arthurian splendor. Architecture evolves from Romanesque into a homegrown Gothic, less obsessed with spires and more with timber and light. The English word hoard stays thick with blunt terms. Philosophy argues with fewer Latinate abstractions, more short, hard words. The King's Law and the Folk's Law rub shoulders a little longer. Then the 20th century arrives on steel rails and oil. Without a world-spanning British Empire, Europe's balance of power is altered. Germany still unifies. Coal and industry make it a titan. France is stronger earlier, its colonial network denser. A Saxon-leaning Britain is wealthy, but its sphere is narrower. The First World War, if it erupts, has a different cast list and a different script. Britain may enter late or as a broker, its army smaller, its navy respected but not omnipotent. The United States, confronted with a French-dominated Canada and a Dutch Atlantic belt, rises differently. Fewer English-speaking colonies to fuse, more languages at the table, a slower march to dominance. And yet, common threads remain. Steam and steel erase the isolation of islands. Cables cross oceans. Human restlessness doesn't change because one duke fell in the mud. Power accumulates around capital and ideas. In this world, ideas flow in French more than English. The novel of the century is serialized in Paris, not London. The great World's Fair that stuns the globe may be along the Seine, not the Thames. But somebody, somewhere, still hums a poem in a tongue that feels like waves on shingle, old and strong, because Old English never had to kneel. What is lost? The peculiar alchemy that made English global, the blend of Germanic base and French ornament, never happens. The Your World on English subtitles moment never arrives. Shakespeare's shimmering mix is quieter. Churchill never coins thunder in a borrowed lexicon. What is gained? A Europe less exhausted by a two-century feud, a France more confident, a North Sea Commonwealth that makes mercantile cooperation a habit 500 years old. The world map is less red, more patchwork. The Atlantic is not a British lake, but a busy marketplace stamped with more flags. This is the power of one battle. Not just a crown, but a cascade, a missed arrow, a horse stumbling, a rumor of a duke fallen, and suddenly centuries lean a different way. So, what do we take from it? History is brittle. Break a hinge, and doors swing on new rooms. We could have lived in a world where English was a regional tongue, where French orders the skies, where the British Isles remained a chorus rather than a solo. The next time someone tells you history is inevitable, remember the ridge at Hastings, the wind, the mud, the line of shields, and the future that almost was.